My name is Muhammad, I'm 7 years old, and I don't remember what it's like to live in my home anymore. Every day it seems like I wake up in a new place. My world fell apart the night our city was bombed. I remember waking up to a loud sound, as if the sky had been torn in half. The ceiling was shaking, the lamps were swaying, and my younger brother, Ali, was crying in fear. My mother rushed to us, wrapped us in a blanket and held us tightly. My room was full of my drawings, and every time I drew a new one, my mum would hang it on the wall, saying that I was talented, like a real artist. But now it's all gone. Our house, our garden, even my drawings, everything is gone. I can't paint our house anymore because it's gone. One day I woke up to a loud explosion, and everything was shaking. My mother shouted for me to hide under the bed, and I did as she said. The explosions were getting closer and closer, and the house was shaking so much that I thought it was going to fall down. Mum and Dad hid me with their bodies, and I could hear their hearts beating as hard as mine. After that day, we could no longer stay at home. All our possessions were destroyed, our house was a wreck, and we had nowhere to go back to. We took only what we could carry, some clothes, documents and some food. I took my sketchbook, but my father said it was too heavy and made me leave it behind. We left our town under the cover of night, along with other families who had also fled. I saw fear in the eyes of the adults, heard mothers whispering prayers and children crying. My mum was holding my hand so tightly that it hurt, but I didn't tell her. We walked for a long time until we reached the refugee camp. There were many people there, just like us, with empty eyes and exhausted faces. We were given a place in a tent where we could sleep on the floor. It was cold and I was shivering all night. I looked at my mum's pale face and the dark circles under her eyes and realized that she was awake too. Dad was sitting at the entrance to the tent, looking into the darkness, and I knew he was watching over us. Every day we stood in line for food. It wasn't much, just some bread and water, but my dad always gave me his portion. He said he wasn't hungry, but I could see how thin he had become. We tried to find a job, but there were so many people around us who were also looking for an opportunity to earn something. My dad went to town every day to try to find work, and my mum sat with me in the tent, holding me on her lap, trying to read books to distract us both from the terrible reality. Her voice was quiet and shaky, like the wind coming through the holes in our tent. Sometimes I saw other children running around the camp, laughing, playing games. But I couldn't bring myself to join them. They seemed like strangers to me, their laughter cut my ears. I wanted to draw, I wanted to create another world where there would be no explosions and no fear, where we could all live in peace. But I had neither an album nor paints. And so I sat in our tent, looking at the walls swaying in the wind, and thinking about our home. One day, when my dad came back from the city, his face was even more gloomy than usual. He sat down next to my mother and they started talking in a whisper. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I knew it was bad news. I saw my mum brush a tear from her cheek and my heart sank. Later, my mum told me that my dad hadn't been able to find a job, that our future was unclear, that we didn't know how long we could stay here. I could hear the despair in her voice and didn't know how to comfort her. Every day seemed the same as the day before. We woke up, stood in line, waited. Sometimes we would hear the sounds of explosions in the distance, and then people in the camp would start to panic, gathering their belongings, ready to flee even further. I was afraid that one day we would be forced to flee again, that we would never find peace. One evening, as the sun was setting, turning the sky red, my mother told me that tomorrow we would go further. That there was a place where we could find work and a roof over our heads. She tried to smile, but I could see that she didn't believe her own words. Dad was silent, looking at the ground, his face tense. That night, I lay on the floor of our tent, listening to the wind blowing overhead. I thought about our house, the garden with flowers, my mum smiling and my dad bringing me paints. I tried to remember these images so I wouldn't forget, so I could keep them in my heart. I knew that life had changed forever, that we would never go back to the way it was before. But I also knew that we had to move on, we had to find a new home where we could be happy again. At dawn, we packed our things and set off. My mum held my hand, and my dad walked in front, carrying a bag with our belongings. We left the camp behind, along with hundreds of other people who, like us, were looking for a safe place. I looked at the horizon where the sun was rising and thought that one day we would find our new home. And then I would be able to paint again. We walked for a long time, and the road seemed endless. Heavy dust rose up under my feet, burning my throat, and the sun was baking mercilessly. I could see my mother pressing her lips together to avoid showing her fatigue, but her steps were getting slower. Dad walked ahead without looking back, and I tried to keep up with him to keep up. Around us were other people, men, women, children, old people, all silent, gloomy, each deep in thought. I felt their tiredness and hopelessness as if they were my own feelings. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine that we were not walking on this difficult road, but on our street near home. It was always quiet and cozy there, the trees provided shade, and the air smelled of flowers from my mother's garden. I remembered how my dad and I used to sit on the bench and he used to tell me stories about distant countries, seas, and mountains that I had never seen. Now it all seemed so far away, almost like a dream that dissipated at dawn. Finally, we reached another camp. It was a large field filled with tents, just like our previous shelter. There were many people here, even more than where we had come from. I felt a sense of anxiety. There were strange faces everywhere, strange looks. But my mother squeezed my hand tighter, and it gave me a sense of security. We were given a place in one of the big tents where other families were already living. I saw a woman sitting on the floor, holding a small child in her arms. Her eyes were empty and her face was haggard. She did not even look at us when we entered. In the other corner of the tent, an old man with a long gray beard was sitting, staring somewhere in front of him, as if into a void. Even his movements seemed slow, as if he had long since lost interest in everything that was happening around him. We spread a blanket on the floor and sat down. Dad started looking around, looking for someone to talk to about work or food. Mum kept me close to her, hugging me as if she was afraid I might disappear. I could hear her heart beating in her chest, and it made me feel calmer. The following days merged into one long series. We stood in queues for food. My dad went back to the city to look for work. Mum stayed with me, telling me stories to distract me. But her voice no longer had the joy it once did. Her eyes remained sad even when she smiled. I saw her go up to my dad every night when he came home and ask if there was any news. Dad would always just shrug his shoulders and say that nothing had changed. One night I woke up to voices. It was Mum and Dad. They were whispering, but I heard every word. "We can't stay here forever," said my dad, "I have to find a job. We won't survive on these rations. And if you leave, how will we manage without you?" Mum asked. "I'm afraid for Khaled. He has changed so much since we left home." "I know," Dad replied, "but I will do everything I can to find a way. We have to stay together. I won't leave you." I closed my eyes again, pretending to sleep, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't want Dad to leave, but I also knew he was trying to do everything he could to keep us alive. I saw other men leaving the camp and not coming back. Everyone said they had found work or moved on in search of a better life. But no one knew for sure. One morning, my father announced that he was going to the city for a few days. He promised that he would come back with news. I saw how my mother tried to hide her tears as she said goodbye to him, hugging him as if it was the last time. Dad looked at me and smiled, hugging me tightly. "You have to be strong, Khaled," he said, "you are the man in our family while I am gone. Take care of your mum." I nodded, trying to look serious, even though my chest was tight with fear. I watched my dad walk away, his figure disappearing into the crowd, and felt the world grow even colder and more uncomfortable. The days dragged on slowly, like a year after another. We waited for Dad to return, looking every evening in the direction he had left. But he never came back. Every day, my mother became more and more silent, and I saw her face grow pale and tired. She tried not to show her despair, but I could hear her crying at night, thinking I was asleep. One day, as I was sitting at the entrance to our tent, looking at the other families waiting, an old man with a gray beard, whom I had seen on the first day, approached me. He sat down next to me and his eyes looked directly at me. "You're looking for your dad, right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, not knowing what to say. He sighed and looked up at the sky. "War takes away everything we love," he said. "It destroys our homes, it separates us from our loved ones. But you have to remember that you are still alive. And as long as you are alive, you have hope." His words were so simple, but there was something in them that made me think. I looked at my small hands, dirty and worn, and realized that despite everything, I was still alive. Mom is alive. We must continue to wait, to fight, to search. That evening, I took a piece of cardboard and a piece of coal from our fire. And I started drawing. I drew my dad, I drew our house, our garden, I drew my mum smiling. I painted so that I wouldn't forget, so that I could keep those memories that were dear to me. My mother saw what I was doing and quietly sat down next to me, hugging me. Her embrace was warm, and I knew that we could survive everything as long as we were together. I don't know where my dad is now. But I know that he is somewhere, that he is looking for a way to come back to us. And I promise myself that I will wait for him, that I will paint our house, our family, our dream of peace. And one day, when the war is over, we will be together again, and I will show him all my drawings. And then we will build a new home, where there will be room for all our dreams. As the days pass, the camp becomes a second home for us, although I am still not used to the constant noise and movement. People come and go, faces change, but the stories remain the same, stories of loss, of lives destroyed, of hope that lives somewhere deep inside, despite all the difficulties. I am beginning to understand that we are all here as wreckage of one big ship broken by war. Each of us is holding on to a small piece of the past, trying not to drown in a sea of uncertainty. Mum is getting quieter every day. She rarely speaks, more often she just sits in the tent, hugging her knees and staring at the same point. I know she is thinking about Dad, about our home, about everything we have lost. Sometimes she leaves the tent and walks around the camp, as if looking for someone. Each time she returns with empty hands and eyes that seem even more tired. I can see how hard it is for her, and I try to help her as much as I can, fetching water, sharing food, listening when she dares to speak. But the more I try, the more I feel the distance between us growing, like an invisible wall growing between us, and I can't find a way to break it down. I start spending more time on the street, looking at people passing by, listening to their conversations. Most of them are refugees like us. They are looking for news, waiting for help, trying to survive another day. I hear them discussing different ways to escape. I hear about cities where they can find work. I hear about borders to cross. They are all looking for a better life, but no one knows where to find it. One day, volunteers come to the camp. They bring food, water, and medicine. Their arrival is always an event. People gather around the trucks, stretch out their hands, ask for help. Volunteers are distributing packages, trying to do it as quickly as possible, but I see fatigue in their eyes. They too are living in this chaos, trying to help, trying to change something, even a little. I watch them from a distance, I don't come close. One of the volunteers notices me and comes over. He smiles, trying to calm me down, asks me my name, where I am from. I don't know what to say. I want to ask him if he has seen my dad, if he knows where he is, but I can't say the words. The volunteer gives me a piece of bread and a bottle of water, and I nod gratefully. His presence brings me a little peace, like a warm ray of sunshine breaking through dark clouds. When he leaves, I turn back to our tent and see my mother sitting with her head down. She looks so tired that I want to hug her and tell her that everything will be fine. But I know it's not enough. I know that she is waiting for news from Dad, waiting for him to return to our home, waiting for the war to end. I sit down next to her, and we sit in silence, listening to the sounds of the camp that have become part of our lives. Time passes and the days become similar to each other. The camp is slowly turning into our new life. We are learning to survive in this world where everything is unstable and uncertain. I no longer see other children playing and laughing. All of them, like me, are beginning to understand what war is, what losses are. We are all getting older, even those who are still very young. One evening, I find a piece of cardboard and a pencil left by one of the volunteers near our tent. I sit down on the floor, put the cardboard in front of me and start drawing. I draw our house, the garden, my parents. I draw what remains in my memory, like the last ray of light in the darkness. My mother sees what I am doing and sits down next to me. She looks at my drawings, and I see her eyes fill with tears. She reaches out and hugs me. It is the first time in a long time that I feel her warmth. We sit together, looking at the pictures, and I feel the world around us become a little less scary. I know that we have lost a lot, that our past life is not coming back. But I also know that we are still alive, that we are together, and that gives me hope. We may have lost our home, but we cannot lose our memories, our dreams. Night falls on the camp and we fall asleep on our blanket. Mom holds me in her arms and I know that we can survive anything as long as we are together. I dream of the day when we will find our home again, when the war is over and we can live in peace. I don't know when that day will come, but I know it will come. And when it comes, I will draw it so that I will never forget it. If this story has touched your heart, please like and subscribe so you don't miss other important stories. Your comments and support are very important to me. Please share this story with your friends and family, because the more people learn about such tragedies, the more chances we have to change this world for the better. Let's stand together to support those who are fighting for survival and hope, even in the darkest of times.